And, I tell all of our fellows, I've never seen a broke philanthropist. You ask for money, you get advice. You ask for advice, you get money. But what do you enjoy more, making money or spending?
Welcome everyone to the greatest financial literacy podcast on the planet, MBA Unplugged. Today, we are blessed to have such a highly esteemed guest. So with over 20 years of experience in financial sectors, founder of Montgomery Tech Lab, also former CEO of the company Lab, a graduate of Duke University Fuqua School of Business, an alum of the Morehouse College, and the CEO of AltFinance, Mr. Marcus Shaw. Mr. Marcus Shaw, how are you doing today?
Oh, man, that's incredible, Charles.
Yes, sir.
That's incredible,
yes, sir.
man.
Yes, sir, we got to.
You got to eulogize me, man. When my time comes, I want you to eulogize me, man. That's the best I felt in a long time.
Yes, sir.
Did you say the
Morehouse College.
That sounds like the Ohio State University.
Oh, yeah, OH.
Damn, that's where I thought it was coming
That's
from.
my team. Professor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
That's good.
Doing good.
That's good.
That's
good.
Happy
So-
to have Marcus here. Marcus
Good brother.
and I just saw
Absolutely,
each
man.
other
Out in
LA. So
incredible days.
Yes,
Incredible
sir.
days.
So, Mr. Shaw, I know I'm aware of your prestigious background. And so if you don't mind giving the viewers a little background about yourself, run down your education, current positions, and accolades if you would like.
Yeah. So, Charles, as you stated, I'm currently the president and CEO of AltFinance, an organization focused on building diversity in the $12 trillion alternative investment industry by partnering with HBCUs, including Morehouse College, to give students here access to career pathways, understanding, and networks that help build a precedent for a strong career in alternatives. Myself have been in and around in the investment industry for 20 years. Before that was an engineer, and I went to Morehouse College, class of 1999, and was also a dual degree student at Georgia Tech, and was an engineer at IBM straight out of undergrad, and then decided to go back to business school, where really I fell in love with finance at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke.
Yes, sir. So I know you did mention a little bit about AltFinance, in which it talks about alternative investments. So for people who don't know, what is an alternative investment for someone who maybe just know about stock market? I know there's equity, private equity, real estate, credit. What is alternative investment?
So broadly, we talk about alternative investments as investment asset classes outside of traditional stocks and bonds. So stocks that we see as publicly traded stocks on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. And these are instruments that are highly liquid and used to build wealth in our investment portfolios. Publicly traded bonds are similarly available and traded publicly and are highly liquid. Alternative investments include hedge funds, which are publicly traded strategies, but oftentimes in less liquid positions and take advantage of longing and shorting stocks. So you can bet that a stock will go down, and that's a hedge position. What we really focus on are private equity, so private investment in companies, which is the largest market in the world. Private debt, which is a private loans made to companies that are not publicly traded. And in addition to that, real estate and infrastructure, which represents physical and real assets, investments in physical and real assets. And that's an industry that, quite honestly, we have not had a ton of exposure to, but it's a massive industry, over $12 trillion in assets invested in those asset classes globally.
So I know, like you said, we're not really exposed to alternative investments. So when it comes to AltFinance, how do you guys what is your purpose with giving students into the next level, let's say to Wall Street or these firms, private equity firms? What really is the goal of AltFinance?
So the goal, and Professor Young's been around this, but the goal of AltFinance is to increase the investment and finance acumen of students so that they understand all of the options, all of the career options that are available to them. What's really interesting about alternative investments is it can be an extremely lucrative career. Many of the billionaires that exist, many of the sports team owners and other billionaires that exist operate in the world of private investments. They've started firms that invest in privately owned companies, privately held companies, and there's an aspect of that economics called carry that allows them to participate in the upside of selling a company and allows you to accrue a ton of wealth if you do it right.
Right.
Now, everybody's not going to do it right. Everybody's not going to make every shot that they take.
Right.
But the goal for AltFinance is to make sure that students at HBCUs know about this opportunity, and if they're willing to take the risk, that they have the opportunity to do so.
So you did talk about alternative investments, but let's say someone wanted to go into IB or investment banking. Do you guys still provide options for people who maybe want to get into finance, maybe a route that isn't so much alternative investments?
So, Charles, is a great question, and it's kind of one of the little secrets of investment banking is that many students who will go directly into investment banking see the next step is private equity. And this is something that a lot of our fellows and students that are involved in AltFinance learn on day one, which is the world of finance, investing, investment banking, broadly what we call high finance, is an apprenticeship model. And it's got layers, and everybody comes in as an analyst.
Right.
But it's what you do from there, how quickly you do it, the network that you build up, the knowledge base that you build up, the experiences that you build up that'll determine where you go in the long term. And, some people will fall out of that pipeline, but they can do very well, even with a 3, 4, 5-year career in the business. You can become an entrepreneur. You can become a politician that understands the business community. You can become an academic. You can become a consultant. But if you really want to understand business, all right, finance is the way that business works in this country. So if you really want to understand business, looking at it from a finance perspective, I believe, is the best place to start.
That's interesting that you say that IB is almost like an apprenticeship for these students. So what kind of skill set do these students need to develop in their first couple years that you think will make them successful, not only in IB, but ultimately in private equity and going forward?
Yeah, so I think there's a combination of hard skills and soft skills that you need to be successful. On the hard skill side, you got to be able to understand how to break down a company from a financial statement and how to model that company out and forecast what the expectations will be for that company going forward. It's just a mission critical skill that you have to have in this business. You have to be able to do it quickly. You have to be able to do it with conviction. You have to be able to do the type of research that's going to allow you to put the best inputs in that model so that you get the best outputs out. And we talk about this a lot. Just like any sport or anything that requires muscle memory, it takes reps to get it done, right? So if you're a young athlete or a young person with talent, that can be musical talent, theatrical talent, any talent, the same rigor that you put into practicing that talent is the same rigor you need to put in to doing financial analysis. Right. And you can do it early on.
You do it, and the thing about it, they're good skills to have. But here's the thing: and we talked about this earlier today when we met with Dean Gibbs, is that and you being a math major,
right?
And my dad being a math person, and hounding me about stuff. I always remember him you got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice. And I was like, okay, I got that. It's just, so now when I talk to students, it's about reps. It's about that memory for you to be able to do it and look at it because you've seen it so many times.
That's right.
But there's one thing that you just said that I try to teach my students: have that conviction, even if it's wrong or right. Just have that confidence, because having that confidence is half the battle.
Right.
It's half the battle,
and it keeps you in the game.
It keeps you in the game.
The reality is, it's an imperfect business. You will be wrong. But the ability to have confidence in your process and have confidence in yourself is critical.
That's right.
Yeah.
People miss shots. LeBron misses shots every night. But if he didn't have confidence, he wouldn't take anymore. Right? So I think for students, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in business school, that's where I really fell in love with finance. As you said, I was a math major at Morehouse. I always enjoyed just intellectual rigor in the math department.
Still wondering why you're a math major. We need to talk about that.
I was a math major.
That's a little different.
I didn't have an AltFinance to kind of help guide me and help me understand what Wall Street was about.
Yeah, okay.
I'll be honest. I never talked with money about with my parents when I was young. So this concept of going into a high earning career was something that I didn't really have perspective for. My parents were very much focused on education and educational performance, and having a deep understanding of something, right? To understand things deeply. I've taken that same approach towards finance later in my career, but I fell in love with finance in grad school, and during that time, every week, I analyzed the stock. Every single week. So by the end of my year, I had 30 stocks that I had done true analytical rigor on. And some models were good, some models were not. But generally, I got better after every iteration. And I would encourage students, whether you're a freshman or a sophomore, to take that up early. Find companies. I play a game with my kids called Who Owns That, right? So we're driving down the street. They say, I want to stop at a store. I say, tell me who owns it. Is it publicly held? Is it privately held?
Wow.
And I let them use their phone, right?
Yeah.
But now they know.
Get
So,
in the habit.
now they know they're thinking about ownership. And the next step would be, well, tell me a little bit about the business model. Right? I remember the first time I was talking to my kids about Facebook and Google, right? And they looked at Facebook and Google as tech stocks. And I said, well, do you know that 80-90% of the revenue for those companies is generated by ads?
Right.
That's a media company,
This is a media company. Absolutely.
right?
Yep. Yep.
That's where their money comes from.
Or just like McDonald's, people think McDonald's is, they're a restaurant company. McDonald's is a real estate.
It's a real estate
Do not
company.
forget that.
That's right.
And so, my dad used to do the same thing. He wouldn't so much say who owns it, but we would drive around because I grew up Jesse Jackson had Operation Breadbasket.
Oh, yeah.
Before they made Operation Push, and we were telling Tarji when she was talking about franchising, my dad would drive around the south side of Chicago and say, okay, a black guy owns this, or a black person probably owns this McDonald's, or a black person probably owns this. And that's when I started seeing ownership differently, but also because I didn't have Google, I used to wait for my Black Enterprise
Right.
magazine. That's when I said, when I got Black Enterprise, I was like locked in, so I get it. Yes.
That's right. And the McDonald's example is dead on. It is absolutely a real
It's
estate
real
company.
estate company.
Yeah. So, Mr. Shaw, you brought up a good point. When you said your parents kind of didn't expose you to that financial aspect early on in life. So let's say for someone who maybe doesn't grow up on the financial aspect of things and doesn't really have this knowledge, how can we change that stigma to get the influence early of finance, and how can we make that just really transfer on later on in life? Like, how do we
Yeah.
get that exposure early on?
So, my take is really based on two things here. Number one, we need to destigmatize kind of the negative aura around money and high earning roles. The reality is most of the kids in our program and most people that I've seen in my 30-year experience with HBCUs, most people that go to HBCUs want to have a positive impact on their community. There's a natural spirit of service and give back. And, I tell all of our fellows, I've never seen a broke philanthropist, right? If you want to give back money, you've got to earn money, unless you're running a foundation, and that's fine. But if you're running somebody else's money and somebody else's foundation, it's up to them how they utilize that capital. But you don't have to be a big time, Robert Smith in order to make it happen. Now, Robert Smith is a perfect example, though, of saying, I want to give money back to Morehouse, right? And others, the people that started AltFinance are saying they want to give money to support the development of students at HBCUs.
Right.
If you want to be in a position where you're directing capital, then you got to earn it. And alternative investments is an ideal place to earn money.
Okay, so I know you said with the goal of AltFinance is to get HBCU students to that next step. So that next step hasn't really accepted our people, our community, as much as it should. So basically, I guess I'm understanding is, why is there still such a lack of minority held on Wall Street of African Americans when so many advancements like AltFinance itself has been to help improve that number? Why is it still such a lack of minority?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is not going to fully fulfill you. The reality of Wall Street, probably different than other business industries and sectors, is that it's a narrow funnel, right? So you're going to have a few thousand people that come into investment roles every year. That funnel narrows up to a very fine point at the tip. And so while it is an apprenticeship business, there is a sense of natural attrition that's built into the business. And so the key is, if you want to get more people at the top, you got to A, either expand the pie, or B, put more people into the top end of the funnel. There are examples of both, right? We've got examples of, Vern Perry at Blackstone, a Morehouse alum that is doing incredible work at Blackstone and raising, I think he's at $50 or $80 billion now in terms of a secondary fund that he's raising. But he's really worked his way through the business. Again, you look at Robert Smith, who was in the business early on in banking, but then went and created a fund of his own. So he expanded the pie. I think that in order for us to have a seat at the table all along the way, you've got to focus on both, right? You need to have people that are starting their firms and people that are really progressing and getting promoted within firms and having leadership roles there as well.
Well, that proposes me to ask another question, a second part to that question of, let's say someone is a student in my shoes. How do they network to a professional or to get in that door? I mean, I know maybe some people are like, well, you go up to a conference and you meet them, shake their hand, but they're doing that 100 times a day.
Right.
How do you stand out? How do you get yourself out so they remember you?
Well, shameless plug here for AltFinance, right? This is
Yeah.
part of what we help do, right? That is part of the solution set of AltFinance, and a challenge that we saw in the market is it is hard to create opportunities naturally, right, where people can just meet practitioners in the business. But in order for us to be effective at our mission, we've got to create opportunities. And so we have generous and gracious mentors that participate in AltFinance and work at our partner organizations because they know how bright our fellows are and how gifted they are and how enthusiastic they are about being in the business. Then they will give of their time.
That's right.
Right? And I think that's a general truism for any young person. If you show enthusiasm and interest consistently, there are experienced people who will want to give you time.
Right.
And I learned this in entrepreneurship, and I think it's true in the world of talent development as well. You know, there's a saying: if you're an entrepreneur, if you ask for money, you get advice. You ask for advice, you get money. Mm-hmm. There's a similar truism in the world that we see, where if you ask for a job, you just may get advice on how to get a job. But if you ask for advice on how to get a job and you make people part of your story, all of a sudden, you're going to be properly prepared, and everybody wants somebody who's properly prepared.
That's right. You know, I had a question. Why don't you, and it's not a shameless plug, we need to know about AltFinance, because when I found out about it, and I've always studied it, and not because you're a Morehouse brother, and, you know, we got that to, you know, on the same plate, and that's not a bad thing, but when I saw it, I was like, man, this is some powerful stuff, because when I came out in undergrad in 88, and I'm old. I'm old, okay? And we had the AARP jokes. You know, go ahead and do them now. Go ahead and do them now. Okay, anyway. There was just commercial banks.
Right.
So I went to First Chicago. At that time, it was like the third or fourth largest bank, and that's where I got my corporate finance training for those 2 years. Now I see that you have access to, I'm old school, the LBO firms, right? The KKRs,
right.
The Barclays, whomever, that's all I knew. The Dungeons at the Gate, those books, right? But tell us about AltFinance. Where did it start? How did it come about? How did you get involved? All that stuff, because I think it's important for people to know.
You're right, and Professor Young, to put it in perspective, the firms that came together and founded this organization, Apollo Global Management, Ares Capital Management, and Oaktree Capital Management, 3 of the largest and most successful alternative investment firms in the economy, did not exist when you were coming out of college. Right? This industry, by and large, is 40, maybe 50 years old tops. And all of the founding principles are still living. Right? So we are in the infancy of a business that has already built incredible value in the economy. To the point where if I look at the attribution or the allocation of alternative investments in the endowment for our own college here at Morehouse, when we were graduating, right? Probably non-existent when you were graduating, less than 5% or so when I was graduating. Today, I would guess it's north of 30%.
Wow.
Right? So the industry is not only taking share in finance while it's growing a pool as well. So it's, that's the win-win in business, right? If you can grow a pool and take share while you're growing that pool, that's what we call kind of the money shot, right? For in any industry. But AltFinance kind of came about as the principles at those 3 firms, Apollo, Ares, and Oaktree, in reaction to a lot of the racial conversations that we were having in a post-George Floyd world, said more than how do we just solve this by cutting a check to,
That's right.
one organization or another, but how do we look in the mirror and address our own shortcomings in terms of talent and how we identify talent? And in this moment of reflection around race and equity, how do we build and identify a solution set that can not only solve for the big problem, but also solve for our specific problem, right?
Yeah, and you kind of touched on my next point when you talk about the bigger problem. So I saw a statistic that said by 2053, the median income of black families is projected to be $0. Now, speaking of, you talk about the bigger problem of creating generational wealth. I want to ask your expertise on the topic of this wealth gap.
Yeah.
How can we start to close it or minimize it, just going into the future? As we said, the economy is just so, especially of alternative investments, is relatively newer, and we still have time to make up this gap. What do you see? Like, what is your take on the wealth gap?
So, this is Marcus Shaw speaking, right? I'm speaking out of my own experience and out of work that I've been around for over 20 years. So, if you were to evaluate real GDP growth over the past 30 or 40 years, you get to something around 2 to 3%, right? That's a proxy for if you just stay and you work your job, you'll get a 2 to 3% pay raise for cost of living every year, right? So if you just work, you got a nice job, you come out of school, you make good money, and you do that for the next 30 or 40 years, you'll kind of be around 2 or 3% real growth, right? Returns for the publicly traded markets over that same period in time, let's call it 6 to 8%, depending on the universe that you look at. What that says is, by operating not only in your workplace, your workforce economic world, but also operating in the investment economic world, right? Because you got to invest in order to take part in that 6 to 8%. You are now doubling to tripling your returns. Your returns become your wealth. Right? So, years ago, I'm sure when I was coming into school and you were coming out, the concept of pensions started to come down, right?
Yeah,
and we started to move towards defined contribution.
That's right.
And
Yep.
I will tell you, my first years out, I didn't contribute a lot to my because I wanted my cash in my hand because that's what I was used to. And, it's embarrassing to say, but that did not last long, right? I think in order for us, number one, to do our part on addressing the wealth gap, we've got to have a more healthy relationship with taking risk and investing, all right? Now, that's not even addressing the part that's out of the control, which is how do we address income disparity, right? You're doing the same job as somebody that doesn't look like you. How do we make sure you're getting compensated fairly?
That's right.
All right, that's a whole nother issue. That is a large systemic issue. How do we make sure that, the funding that's supposed to come to our institutions to support our growth, right, that allows us to go get higher earning jobs when we graduate, how do we make sure all of that funding comes to the institution? And, that's a bigger political issue, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of what we can do, we can have a healthier relationship with risk, right? We can educate ourselves. Just because, you invest doesn't mean you have to be an investor, right? Like, that doesn't have to be your day job. You can be a teacher, you can be a physician, you can be an attorney, but you got to have a healthy relationship with risk because opportunities will come up for you to invest directly in things. And if you do it well over the course of your life, over the long term, you will have higher returns than if you don't. Right? That's one thing.
And that's interesting you say that because my parents, both very well educated. My dad went to Howard, and my mom was a nurse, and my dad was a teacher, and they saved their money.
Yeah.
They just saved. They didn't know what to invest. Just typical middle class black families. The biggest thing was get the house.
Right.
And once you got the house, okay, we've made it. And I think people of color still kind of have that mentality. As long as I get the house, we're fine. All that other stuff you guys are talking about, I'm not going there. And I'm like, there's other ways to create wealth,
Right,
than just buying that house.
and the house is interesting
Because it's a utility,
right?
And that's the way I look at it. And it's important. I'm not saying it's not important, but to get to the next level, maybe you might touch on that. So
Yeah, I think the home ownership. Now, this is a bigger conversation. Home ownership is interesting. Depending on where you look, the statistics will say 60 or 70% of the disparity between black wealth and white wealth comes from the transfer of home ownership.
Yeah.
But that's a bigger statement than just owning a home, right? And I have this conversation with a lot of buddies who are now becoming caregivers for our parents, and we start talking about estate planning and all of those things. It only works if you actually monetize the value of the home, or we think multi-generationally, and you pass the home on to your child who lives in the house.
Yeah.
But if your parents, Charles, let's guess. Let's say your parents bought a house for $150,000 when you were first born, and now that house is worth $450,000.
Yeah.
But you get this big time job, right? And you went to Morehouse College, and you go up to Wall Street, and you buy $1 million apartment in New York. And now your parents say, well, come back to Tennessee, right? Or, we got this $450,000 house sitting here for you. But you're like, I don't know if I'm going back to Tennessee. Now they sell it. They sell it under pressure. They don't get $450. They get $385. They sell it to somebody who's not related to you. No value accrues. They're, in their retirement years, they want to go spend some money. They whittle down that $385 gap down to $220, right? Because they go on a bunch of vacations. Right. Now, instead of $300,000, you get $75,000 in probate. Right? That's after, God willing, your parents, when they go up yonder. And then that gets taxed at, 30%? So now, what you thought was $350, what they thought was $350 of wealth building, turns into $50. And that number, that standard deviation, can swing negative.
Right.
Because if you don't keep the house up, guess what happens? It's not $450, it's $285, $250. Right? Somebody comes in, and you just want to get rid of it, and they just want a little bit of cash. And now they spend that cash plus more before it's their time, and you're taking care of it.
Yeah. So it does bring up the conversation, though, what you said. Professor Young, I want to go back to your point. You said it's just to get the house. But it's almost like some people know better. And that's part of what we're doing here is to promote, give you guys this knowledge so you know what to do when you get to the situation. So I want to go back to the point of it's not just saving anymore. As we know with inflation, almost your money's depreciating just sitting in a bank account. So instead of just saving, would you recommend someone look into investments, obviously the stock market or bonds? Which one would you say would be some of the top to put your money in as an investment?
Yeah, so the answer I'm going to give today is distinctly different than the answer I would have given 3 years ago, right? I came from a school of investment where we looked at monetary policy, right? So I look at what the Fed is doing. I look at where interest rates are. Today you can find 4.5%, 5% money market accounts, which is not a bad place to park cash, as long as you believe inflation is lower than that. Whether it is or not is still, some months we get low prints, some months we get high prints on inflation. When interest rates were low and real interest rates were negative, which is where we stood for, basically 2011, 2012 up to 2021, it made sense, and this is why I think you saw a lot of entrepreneurship. It made sense to see if you could find returns through other business endeavors, right? And so cash was cheap and returns were low, so finding an opportunity to buy a business or start a business made a ton of sense. I still believe this generation of black folks need to take some risk, and we need to think about ways that we can start businesses, right? Even if you're working on a W-2, I think it makes sense. It's good for your children to see this, right? You talked about it, right? It's good for your children to see how you run a business. I actually believe that some of the more entrepreneurial immigrant cultures have done a really good job of building institutional knowledge around business because they ran small businesses with a family environment, and the kids grow knowing revenue and expenses.
But you know what? They almost didn't have a choice.
Right.
Because they couldn't participate in our economy the traditional way, get a job and, get a home, save money, blah, blah, blah. They said, oh, okay, I'm here. I don't want to go back, so I have to create this opportunity. Right. And so that's, a lot of cultures, Asian culture, Latinos and so forth. They, in order for us to participate in what we call American pie, we got to create our own opportunities.
Right.
And that's an entrepreneurship which I'm big on. That's they are the engine, of an economy that no one thinks about.
Yeah.
And it's almost, and Professor, I want to add on to that point where you said they almost have nowhere to go. It's getting to a point now where we don't really have anywhere else to go to, in a way.
Yeah.
But I want to add on to that, because what change do you think really has to happen for our financial situation to change when it comes to equity? You mentioned the house, the passing down of home ownership, I know is the biggest, largest transfer of wealth, but what I think is more of a psychological change that has to happen to really change our financial situation.
Well, as my good friend will say, and he'll watch, he's gonna laugh. It's black folk relationship with money.
Yeah. It's so. I completely echo that sentiment. My nutritionist talks about my relationship with food. She says, you enjoy food too much, right? I think for money,
Ain't a bad thing.
well, it's interesting. I posed this question, and maybe I'll ask both of you. The economy needs people to spend money, right? We have a consumption-driven economy. You need to spend money in order to stimulate growth. But I ask a question all the time, and I ask this of my wife: what do you enjoy? Take the morality and moral implications of it away. But what do you enjoy more? Making money or spending money?
Spending money.
Making money.
Right? This is a really interesting philosophical question, because it doesn't. There's nothing wrong with you saying spending money, because you're a sharp guy. You've got to make money to spend money. Like, you've got a spread calculated already, right? For people of a certain age and from a certain time, right? The making money, like, I don't think about spending money until I've made it, and then I kind of figure out what do I need, right? Whereas you have other people who say, I want this, so I need to make enough money to have this and not be irresponsible. And that spread of responsibility, I think, is the key for understanding how we as a people can increase our aggregate wealth. Because some people say that the spread, that range of responsibility is, I get what I want, and then I just need to have enough to pay my bills.
Right.
There are others that will say, I get what I want, but I got to have enough to invest in my family. There's a guy, I did a program years ago out in California. It's an older brother who's had tremendous success in Silicon Valley in investing in startups, early stage companies, and so forth. Made probably hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? And he's 75, maybe a little older, and he's still investing in early stage deals. And I said, well, why are you doing this? And the point that he made is phenomenal to me. He said, well, I've got 4 grandchildren. So he may not see all of these investments materialize. But he's investing, in a trust or some type of vehicle that will outlive him, to the point where his grandchildren will have several millions of dollars if these deals pop.
But there's another group. I thought you were going to say this, but I'll add on. There's another group of people who spend because they feel like I deserve it, and that one.
Well, I didn't want to get into that because
So it's like, okay, we all deserve,
right.
But how do you deal with that? It's like I say, it gets back to the relationship with money.
Money is not inherently good or bad. What money can do, if properly put in perspective, is buy you freedom, right? And afford you time back.
So you have choices.
And, I look at kind of my generation now, and many of us are at the point where we're taking care of our parents. And so the difference between having enough money or your parents having managed their finances enough to where they were looking ahead and they've got a little bit of capital through a retirement or a pension or something coming back to them, even with a great job, if you get a parent that gets sick or a spouse or a child, it can bankrupt you.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, very quickly.
Absolutely.
I had a hip replacement in 2017. And, between that and a sister-in-law that got sick, and she had a fantastic healthcare plan and she had done really, really well, it is unbelievable how quickly an illness can take all of your wealth away.
Shut it down.
Oh yeah.
Like in the matter of 2 weeks, right? It can all be gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've got to plan for as a people.
That's a great plan. I never thought about it like because especially someone, depending on who you are, if you have kids, you don't have kids, or me, I don't have any kids. I'm divorced, but I don't have any kids, so I'm it.
Right.
I mean, I'm really trying to take care of myself because if I shut down, it all shuts down.
That's right.
So and then I have my mom is 85 and thank God she's in great health. But I constantly worry about that. So I'm making sure that she's taken care of and, I'm taking care of whatever the case might be. So, but you're right. The health, people don't think about that. You can shut it down.
I'll say this, Chris, and this I think gets to a bigger picture. Is it's important to have multi-generational conversations like this conversation.
Right.
We've got a few different generations of Morehouse College having a conversation about money. And there's stuff I learned, there's stuff you guys learned. I didn't have this when I was your age. I had a bunch of jokers over in Graves Hall that I was talking to, right? And we all, none of us knew any more than the other, right? So
blind leading the blind.
Blind leading the blind. And so the ability to sit down with people that you respect that have your best interests at heart, that are a little older and a little younger, and have a real conversation. Because, again, I love my parents. I couldn't have had better parents. But we never had the conversation about money. I was just told save.
Right.
And I had a big, lump of savings that was earning 1%. And, it went from, that's how you go from, as they say, sugar to ish real quick, right? Is, inflation is good when you got some money and you have some hard assets.
I'm sorry, that's funny.
when you're renting, right? When you're renting, inflation eats you alive.
Yeah. So, Mr. Shaw, I know on our phone call, you really said something interesting that really stuck with me. You talked about the importance of having an investor's mindset as an entrepreneur. So if you could elaborate more on that, because I know we talked about how we should take more risk, and maybe that is starting a business, which is entrepreneurship. So what do you really mean? What does it mean to have an investor's mindset as an entrepreneur?
It's a great question, and in running an entrepreneurship center, both in Tennessee and Alabama, I got to know hundreds of entrepreneurs, of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds. The thing that was most unsettling is when entrepreneurs had a myopic focus and a limited understanding of the people that they were trying to raise capital from. So they're obsessive about their idea, and you need to have that, right? You need to know your product, you need to know your market. But ultimately, you really got to understand how an investor is going to look at your business.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes,
it's
sir.
incredibly important. And that can be an equity investor, right? Somebody doing venture capital, or it could be a bank, right? How is a bank evaluating your business?
Yeah.
I think people fall in love with their business.
Yes.
And they fall in love to a point where I think we said it before. We had a podcast where we talked about franchising. And are you coachable?
Yeah.
And a lot of people are just not coachable. I've worked with some people who want to start a business, and they're just so bent on this is right, this is right. I say, okay, fine, but can you look at it this way? Look at it this way. Well, let's just go back to this way. And that's when they're so in love with it, they're attached to it.
That's
you
right.
know? And almost to the detriment where they might not be able to get it off the ground because to your point, they're never looking at it from someone else's optics.
That's right.
So
The only time you can afford to be uncoachable as an entrepreneur is if you are your only investor and you are your only customer.
that's right.
Other than that, if you've got a customer that's not you and somebody that's put money into the business that's not you, you've got to be coachable. Right? You've got to listen and be observant of what the market's telling you. And that's both your consumer market and your investor market.
Yeah. And some people just have such tunnel vision that it blinds them. It's like a cattle running through the street. They only can see straight forward, and it blinds them to their surroundings. But Mr. Shaw, I want to ask you, through all of your experience, I know you've been through a lot of different ventures, financial, tech, things of that nature. What is one of the biggest pieces of advice that you've learned through all of your experiences that you feel like would be most beneficial to a listener?
Yeah, one that has become one of the core values of AltFinance is in the world of business and finance, and I think it's true for everything, but particularly for this industry, you have to master the dual values of humility and ambition, right? And this goes back to the coachability, and it goes to what, understanding what you don't know, knowing what you don't know. You've got to be ambitious, right? Nobody's going to get in the world of business or finance to, be last place.
Right.
Everybody wants to be first. You want to take your best risk-adjusted shot, and for the amount of risk you take, you want to get the maximum amount of reward, right? That's like finance 101, right? Fishing frontier. And if you think you're capable and you got a little bit of hubris, you want to break out of that frontier, right? But, that is only a few can do that, and that's mostly because we don't have full understanding of the risk, okay? But you've also got to have humility. You've got to understand that any idea is capable of failing. And if you have the right type of humility, it will spur intellectual curiosity, which will solve for the problem. So there's a virtuous cycle here, right? Where if you're hungry and ambitious, you go after stuff. If you go after something that's big enough, you're going to fail. If you fail, but you're intellectually curious, you're going to solve for why you failed. Now you go after something bigger.
That's right.
And that's, to me, it's really like some master hunter mentality.
Yeah.
I mean, Nick Saban has said it time and time again, never waste a failure.
Right.
Don't waste it. Because if there's a lesson to learn, when you don't learn that lesson, then that's when you really have failed. Let me ask you a question. I'm going to pivot back on something that I'm interested in. Where do you see AltFinance 5 years from now, 10 years? What is your vision as a CEO, as the face of that organization? Because I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it at Wharton, but I've seen it more so because I was like a kid in the candy store where you had Maverick Carter up there. You had the CFO for Byron Allen's company.
Yeah, I
was more glued in than anybody. I mean, you have great fireside chats.
Yeah,
you just do, and I love them. With the dean of Wharton as well. Where do you see AltFinance, or where do you want to take it?
It's a great question. I would say, number one, over the next 5 years, I will have graduated, in the neighborhood of 120 to 150 students that will either work in the industry, have an incredible acute awareness of how the industry impacts their job and the broader economy, but more importantly, have built a network of people that are doing this type of work.
There you go.
Okay?
Yep.
So that's one. And that's through the fellowship program. Through the Institute, I will have, 3 or 4 times that many people that have an understanding of finance and investing that allows them to make better decisions in their life, whether or not they're investing.
Yeah.
Right? A parent or a young parent at the time that says, wow, all right, rates are coming down. Let me make sure I refinance my home. Or, boy, rates came down and they're going back up. Let me make sure I lock in. Let me think about how I'm saving for my child's, private school or college or 529 and looking at the environment, right? Or I just got a big bonus, right? Guy like this. I just got a big bonus from my investment bank. I see some people that are looking at, some buddies that graduated with me that want to invest in a franchise. I'm not scared.
Yeah.
I'm not going to save this bonus. I'm going to invest a portion of this bonus.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right? That's the vision.
That's the mindset. Yeah, and it can just take you so many different places, like you said, throughout your life.
So you said 2 things, so the audience knows as well. You said there's a fellows program, and then there's an institute.
An AltFinance Institute.
Can you elaborate the difference?
Yeah. So our fellows program is a multi-year fellowship program that's dedicated to students that have a focus on actually working in the business of alternatives and the pipeline to alternatives, which would include investment banking. Okay. This is a highly competitive fellowship program. We have 8 schools that we partner with. Morehouse is one of the 8. And students participate in what is essentially another class, 4 to 6 hours a week of coaching and mentoring and active learning sessions and 5 workshops that we have per year. They get a mentor from our sponsor organizations. They get direct coaching, but it's really for serious students that are seriously focused on a career in investing.
Can someone who isn't a part of the 8 schools be a part of AltFinance?
So they can be a part, any student at any HBCU can be a part of the AltFinance Institute, which is an online platform that is really focused on helping us scale our impact and building that investor and finance acumen.
Yeah.
The fellowship is currently available at the 8 schools. That's Clark Atlanta University, Howard University, Hampton University, Morehouse College, Morgan State, North Carolina A&T, FAMU, and Spelman.
Okay.
So that's a distinct. So
That's
if you
right.
go to one of those, if you don't go to one of those schools, you can still participate through the institute.
Through the Institute.
Okay. That's good.
And any student
That's
at
great.
any HBCU.
Yeah.
So even if you're at Morehouse and you're not in an AltFinance fellow, but you have an interest in it, you can participate in the Institute as well.
Okay.
And then where can people find the institute and fellowship? Would that be altfinance.com?
AltFinance.com, the opportunities where you can log on or apply for the application. Applications for the fellowship open up January 15th. And so we'll be making the rounds around our 8 campuses. But feel free to reach out to me. I'll even share my email
Yes, sir.
with folks here. It's mshaw, MSHAW, at altfinance.com. Feel free to reach out to me if you have an interest. And again, the platform that you guys have created here is, this is my dream as well, right? It represents us having these conversations, generational conversations with young people that have a real interest in being better than we were, man.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, if you're not wealthier than we are
Yeah.
and better than we are, then there's no point.
Yeah.
Well, the beauty of this is, and I can say this, I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say this. You are our first Morehouse graduate to drive.
Oh, man, you
Yes,
gotta
sir. Yes, sir.
You got gold status.
Yes,
Let's
sir.
go.
Go status.
Let's go, baby.
So
Mr.
one of
Marcus Shaw.
the things about this platform, to participate in our podcast, we only deal with goats.
Only goats.
Oh, man.
That's all we do.
Only
That's the only
goats.
animal here. Okay.
I love it.
And so, and don't we? Well, that's what we do, right?
We only got goats.
That's right. Because we want good information, but we want the right information from the right people.
Right.
And that we respect, that we know they can give out this information. Because just maybe, if we get one person that's going to watch this podcast, like, you know what, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I never thought about doing that. Then it's well worth it. But you're the number one, man. And
Yes,
I
sir.
think that no one ever
status.
take. We might have 5 other Morehouse guys, but
Go status.
when you talk to other people, you always say, "But I was the first."
I love it. I love it. That's where we want to be.
Cream rises.
Cream rises to the top.
Rise to the top.
Absolutely.
Rise to the top. And so, if you guys enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe. If you think Mr. Marcus Shaw is a GOAT, share this with one person who needs to know this information. And from us, Mr. Professor Young,
I got 2 things. We forgot.
shout out behind the camera, Mr. Ryan Mathis, legend behind the camera. Only GOATs up here.
Also an AltFinance scholar.
Yes, sir.
You want me to do the goat sound?
Go ahead, do it.
Man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, we'll see y'all in the next one. Peace.
All right.